was another long, agonizing day of administrative duty. Internal Affairs had pulled me from the streets 9 weeks prior because I was involved in another use of force. By this time in my career, I was tired of the process, the people, and the politics. And quite frankly, I didn't want to be here anymore. I remember leaving the agency or the department, going home to an empty house. My only son at the time was 7 years old, and he was away with family for the holidays. It was around Thanksgiving, and as usual, I had to work. When I arrived home, I thought to myself that this is going to be the perfect time. I went into my bedroom and I sat on the edge of the bed. I unholstered my duty weapon and I thought about how easy it would be to just point the gun up and pull the trigger. In that moment, my goal was to just not have to deal with any of these struggles any longer. As I sat there contemplating suicide, a picture came into focus. It was a picture that I had on my dashboard and my screensaver that reminded me to make sure I come home the same way that I went in. This picture also reminded me of the promise that I made to my son when he was first born, that I would never abandon you the way that my father abandoned me. I reholstered my weapon and I began to cry. I'm talking about one of them cries that came from the gut. I was stuck in between a rock and a hard place because I really did not want to be here, but I had to be. I cried myself to sleep that night in my uniform. I woke up the following day thinking to myself that my life was not supposed to end on the edge of my bed. I got up, I freshened up, I put my uniform back on, and I wore that award winning smile and went right back to work. I couldn't believe that I was in a life and death situation and I did not call for backup. You see, everybody knows by now that law enforcement officers have a very difficult job. They usually get called to deal with problems that civilians don't want to handle. A typical day can turn chaotic in a split second, and without hesitation, that officer will call for backup. Backup means that someone is coming to your aid when things get really bad. An officer may call for backup whenever there's a routine traffic stop that turns into a chase. They'll call for backup whenever there's an armed robbery, a domestic violence call, or an active shooting. You see, the Academy does a phenomenal job preparing cadets to meet challenges head on. I attended the Academy over 20 years ago, and what I remember about the Academy, that it was all about mental toughness, emotional detachment, and tactical readiness, all for the sake of making sure that you did your job effectively. In the Academy, you learn about the law, how to de-escalate, how to call for backup, how to make quality decisions in a high-stress situation, how to use your duty belt. It was a training ground for men and women who are being groomed to become guardians and warriors, who are willing to sacrifice their life to protect and serve the greater good. The weakest links, they were weeded out because they couldn't hang with the big dogs. You see, when you graduate the academy, you get hired on by an agency and you enter field training. In field training, they'll tell you, hey man, forget about everything you learned at the academy. Now you're getting ready to experience real policing. That was basically code for, hey, get ready for this hyper masculine culture where your vulnerabilities and your emotions are not welcomed because they're a sign of weakness. Any rookie that gets exposed to that realizes, oh, it's not safe to share what I feel. So they emotionally suppress. This emotional suppression becomes the process called silent suffering that's managed under the muscles, the tattoos, the cool shades, and a crisp uniform. Silence is a strategy, but the suffering is the untreated emotional wounds that many officers allow themselves to drip dry for the sake of appearing fit for duty. It's this notion that if I forget about this problem or if I distract myself, it'll go away. It's not true. Any injury that goes untreated eventually becomes infected. This is not just a cop story that I'm talking about. This is a human story. Whether you live, work, or play in a high stress environment on a daily basis, you better believe you're sustaining some untreated wounds emotionally. What does an untreated wound look like? It looks like depression. It looks like anxiety. It looks like driving while intoxicated. It looks like excessive force. It looks like functional addiction. It looks like infidelity, domestic violence, and even suicide. It's any behavior unbecoming of a reasonable person. First Help is an organization that keeps track of law enforcement suicide. They report that officers are 3 times more likely to complete suicide or die by suicide than in the line of duty. In addition to that, over the last decade, get this, 1,200 officers have lost their lives to suicide. That's an alarming number. And usually it's underreported. What we know from this stat is that the greatest threat to law enforcement isn't the bad guy out there. It's a matter or an issue that takes place in between the heart and the mind. And usually we don't see it until it's too late. We know that the academy does a good job preparing officers to protect themselves and others against the external threat. But what if the threat is invisible, silent, and unknown to the conscious brain? What if? How do we help officers then? Now, I'll tell you this. When I was in law enforcement, I used to walk around with a scowl on my face all the time. And people would always ask me, Puranda, are you okay? And I would say, yeah, I'm good. It was a lie. It was just easier to deflect with safer answers than to try to make it make sense because I didn't know what I didn't know. It wasn't until I gave myself permission to call backup on my mental health. That's when I went from tactical to tapped in. I discovered in therapy that crazy people don't go to therapy. People who've been through crazy stuff come to therapy. I fell in love with my favorite word, resilience. And I discovered for me that resilience, it's not developed by avoiding pain, it's developed by processing it. In retrospect, during my career, I realized that shame, fear of being seen inadequate by my culture at the agency, paralyzed my ability to ask for help, especially in high stress situations where I was always expected to know what to do. And again, this issue that we're facing, call it an epidemic against law enforcement. It makes me wonder, what if we look at backup differently? What if backup also included helping police officers analyze their invisible struggles? What if the training academy incorporated counseling as a tool, no different from their radio, a tourniquet, or their vest? When deployed or used properly, it can save a life. What if the culture of law enforcement normalized calling for backup on one's mental health, with the notion or the understanding that suicide, the greatest threat to law enforcement, is preventable? Today, I stand before you as an outcome of my healing journey. Dr. Puranda could not exist without Officer Puranda, make no mistake about it. Today, as a licensed clinical mental health counselor, what I do for a living is I help first responders develop the self awareness they need to manage their lives and their careers more effectively. Because I understand that stress left unaddressed creates a mess. Whether you're a child, teenager, an adult, professional athlete, to someone trying to figure out how to manage life on life terms, remaining silent about your struggles is outdated, especially when calling for backup on your mental health not only can keep you fit for duty, but it may also save your life. Thank you.